Welcome to the Non-Breaking Space Show from Austin, Texas. I'm the Internet's Christopher Schmidt. And on today's show, I'm joined once again with Brenda Storer. Brenda is a front-end developer and designer at Thoughtbot. She recently won Best Presentation at CSS DevConf 2017, New Orleans, on the topic of practical CSS grid layouts. Before we get started, some things I'd like you to know. The UX Design newsletter is a weekly list of articles, tutorials, and inspiration handpicked by me. Sign up at uxdesignnewsletter.com and have the best links of the week sent to your email. Set it and forget it with the Non-Breaking Space Show newsletter. Whenever a new show is ready, you'll be notified in your inbox by signing up at newsletter.nonbreakingspace.tv. Did you know we have a YouTube channel? Well, we do. You can watch our show unedited at youtube.com/nonbreakingspace-show. If you hear about a site or resource on this episode, chances are you'll find the link to it on this episode's page at nonbreakingspace.tv. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at Teleject, TELEJECT. As always, thank you for telling others about Non-Breaking Space. Now, on with the show. So that is a great segue that I just dropped because you were in New Orleans for the CSS DevConf this year.
Yes.
So thanks for coming and being a speaker and being part of that. And so the great news is that I think you won Best of.
Yeah.
CSS DevConf. So were you? You
gave me like a big old trophy.
Yeah. Congratulations did you get that through TSA?
I got pulled aside because I had only carry-ons. It was actually like kind of a quandary when I was packing because I'm like one of those obsessive, I will only carry on my luggage type people. And I had been in California beforehand at my brother's wedding and all this stuff. So I had a kind of full suitcase. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to have to check one of my bags? Oh my gosh, no, I'm going to make this happen. Yeah. And so I like got it in my carry-on. And then of course it didn't make it through the security. It got pulled out and they had to like open it up and go through. And I'm like, oh, I have a trophy in there. But he didn't ask me what it was for. I was so upset. He was totally not fazed by my trophy. He's like, oh, okay. And he looked at it and then he sent me on my way. But
whatever. Yeah, this happens. Yeah. So my concern was that it's a pretty hefty trophy. And so they might say like, oh, you can bludgeon someone on an airplane with this or something.
No. They like, he actually knew exactly. He was like, is it glass? And I was like, yeah. He's like, yeah, I think they put the lead in the glass and that sets it off. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. So now you know, like for future award winners. But yeah, thank you. That was really a surprise. Oh, really? Very cool.
Well, thank you for doing it. Like for coming out and doing such a great presentation. I didn't want to have. Because what happens during CSS DevConf is that we, in order to get there, unless you're a featured speaker, if you're not a featured speaker, then we take about 20 plus speakers from like 200 plus submissions, and then they're voted, by the community at large, and to get submitted, and then to get entered, and then once you're there, we actually do voting on those sessions, and then we award like top 6. Gets the magic big yellow pencil, and
which is just as cool as the trophy, actually. Okay. I mean, yeah, I think so too. So, but this magic yellow pencil that you can write with. So I guess that's the magic part. But and then your presentation was best, and your presentation was about CSS grids, right? So yes, woo!
Yeah, and then I felt like just. We could talk more about grids, but and getting into it. But how did you approach your presentation, like in terms of like why did you want to talk about grids and that? So.
Yeah, I mean, I think I geek out on like the new CSS things whenever they're coming about, or I just geek out on like getting like deep into technologies. Like the time I spoke before at CSS Dev Conf was on SVGs, and it was just like a deep dive into like a basics of SVG and what the syntax means. So I feel like this is kind of on a similar vibe because it's something that people are curious about, that just kind of starting to get some buzz, but like I took some time to do a deep dive into it. Actually, I'm just really fortunate that Jen Simmons lives in New York City, and my ThoughtBot New York City, like I went to, she created a meetup, her and Malika Butler, called CSS Layout Club. And I think it's been going for like about a year and a half. And they were looking for a new venue. And I used to go to the meetup and I was like, we can host you at, ThoughtBot New York. So we've been hosting for the past year, and there's usually a meetup like once a month or like every other month. Right. And so for the past year and a half, I've just been listening to Jen Simmons like geek out on grid forever. So it got me to start to play with it super early. And I started giving like a version of this talk in November of last year. So like a year ago at local meetups, just talking about grid, like before it came out, before it was even used. Like I even was like, coding with it behind the flag and like client projects and stuff. So I just was fortunate to like have somebody with lots of knowledge, an expert, like accessible, that I got to learn from and practice from. And so when I was thinking about applying to this conference, I love your conference. One of the things I like about CSS Dev Conf is that it is voted, because I think my biggest insecurity around giving a conference talk or giving a talk is that I'm going to talk about something that nobody's interested in. So that helps right away, I think, to like just totally dissuade that insecurity. I can like drop that if people have voted on it. So, but I figured that there'd probably be a lot of grid talks because it was starting to, like, when did submissions, when was the call for proposals, like April or May?
Yeah, we do early May, April-ish. And then I think late May is when we start doing voting.
Okay. Yeah. So it was like when it was kind of still like it just dropped in browsers in March. So I thought, well, what can, like, it's such a huge spec, and like just to go through the spec, like what else can I do with it that's besides just like, here's Grid 101. And so like I had been using it in client projects. So I work in an agency or a consultancy, and so work on many different clients a year. And so I had been just starting to kind of insert it. And so I thought, well, I learn best by example anyway. And I've got like some different examples. And I think one of the things that keeps coming up about Grid too is like when to use it. Does it replace a framework? Like there's lots of questions. Is it better than Flexbox? Yeah. It's not. It's a complement, but like, and I felt like examples really kind of would teach a lot. And practical, like I'm not also spending a lot of time doing like experimental layouts. Right. I would love to. I really want to, but I think like my wheelhouse is more in like problem solving, the everyday things. And so that was just the angle I took for the talk. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like that was one of, and we do, by going through the results that we got from the feedback, I felt like it kind of mirrored my own thoughts about when I saw your talk. Was like, wow, this is a very practical application about CSS grids. Right. And I felt like a lot of people were really happy to see that talk in that context. And so that's also kind of like where I've written a lot of books about web development. And so I feel like kind of like when I write something, I want to make sure it's practical. And that's kind of like seeded everything we kind of do with our conferences. Is like, hey, we really want to make it practical. So if you want to come to a conference and you just want to like not learn anything or just chill out for a couple days away from work, then this is probably not the conference for you. Like you go to another conference. Like if you really love web and making cool things, this is like probably the conference you want to go to. So that's why like I felt like your talk was really really awesome about that. But let's dive in before we dive in the grids. I just want to say we got Eric Myers and S.L. Wiles' new book.
Oh my gosh, I just like opened it up. I want to order it. Like, look at it's
right here in the video. If you're watching, we have a YouTube video of this talk. So
I love he has a tweet that's like, the first 2 editions aren't even as thick as that edition.
Oh yeah. So it's over 1,000 pages, and just so you know, the grid layout happens in chapter 13, page 655. So 655. So there you go.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is pretty huge, man. So I was wondering if I just ordered it just on a dare to see if the postman would deliver it, but they're like, oh, it's too heavy. You have to pick it up yourself. So, but yeah. So let's just talk about CSS Grid in terms of, CSS Grid is a web design technology, if you will, for laying out pages. Is that good? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what's the difference between? I know she mentioned earlier, like CSS Grid and Flexbox are complements to each other. So what's the difference? Like how would you say, describe the use case for each one?
The short version is that Flexbox and actually everything we've ever used for major layout have been like one-dimensional, one direction. So you can either do things in rows or columns. But what makes Grid so powerful is that it's 2 dimensions, so you can do grids and columns at the same time. So effectively place something on an X and Y axis, but it also isn't breaking the flow of the page. So it's not like absolutely positioning. It's something that can be flexible within a viewport as well. So I think like what's so exciting about so the like kind of the way like I approached it in my talk too was like how to write grid. Like first thing is identify a good use case. And so I'm totally guilty of like, I'm super excited about the new tool and I want to use it for all the things. So I'm trying to like use it in all the places, but sometimes I try and use it somewhere and I'm like, you know what? Actually, I want Flexbox here. Oh. Like something where I think I have like a page that has like it's like a team page and it has, any number of people in a row. Like, but I want like if there's a row of 4 and a row of 3, I want the row of 3 to kind of be in between the gaps of the people 4. So it's kind of like an even odd kind of like centered thing. Like that's not for Grid because Grid wants to put things in like very specific like little squares that are the same in like a whole area. But they share a lot of the same syntax, which is great, and a lot of the same kind of idea where you have a parent element and you say display grid or display flex, and then it affects all of the direct children.
Like I remember before CSS Grid, we had like people were just like, I'm just going to lay out pages in Flexbox, because Flexbox had like modern browser support. And so is that yes or no? Would you like?
I mean, I think it depends on what you're trying to solve, right? Like the way I've been using Grid and the way I've been laying out things is a little bit less about a whole page. I need to figure it all out. I'm instead thinking about like even components on a page.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So maybe the page layout itself is a component, and then I place things, and then inside the components inside of it, you lay things out. So
like a design library type of thing, where like you just like, this component, this module, this molecule, if you will, or whatnot, it has to be like we need a grid for this, right? And so that basically you're kind of like stacking parts of it. Is that right, or is that? Yeah,
like I think like I said, I do like pretty traditional pages, so I haven't used Grid in like a whole page yet.
Yeah.
I think it's also like it's been more reusable for me if I think about it like that, as like components and just how to lay things out in pieces. So like if I have a header with a navigation, like maybe that's on every page. Maybe that is Flexbox. Maybe that needs Grid. Usually it just seems to be Flexbox. But most of the time my pages are just block elements stacked on top of each other. So I don't really like, I have a header,
Right.
I have a main content, and I have a footer.
Right.
Like I don't really need grid for that whole system, right?
Right. Okay.
But maybe my main stuff in the center is going to have like a sidebar,
nice.
or, you know, that's where like inside of there, I'll probably use grid.
Okay. So that's probably where my like coming from the web for my history is like, I think of it as a page, you know, like graphic design. I also have a print design background. So I feel like, oh, I finally have this grid layout. I'm just going to snap it and force it onto the entire page structure, when actually we should just be like modularizing it and say, okay, if you have a header, this has a grid system onto its own, and then the body grid system onto its own, and then a footer. That seems like is that what you're?
I mean, that's how I've been using it, but maybe it is cool to use it, or maybe like there's a really good case like for a certain design to use it more as like the whole, like on your whole body. But I think also because I've been, and I would love to hear about that and see examples of that. But I think I also have been, a lot of times I'm like joining existing projects, so existing code bases.
Right.
And so that's also, I mean, only in consulting are we like spinning up new apps on a regular basis, pretty much. So I think that's a good mentality to have too, is we think of like grid is a grid framework, and it's like a lifetime decision for your app, you know, and then everything has to live off of this. But CSS grid doesn't have to be like that at all. Like you can use it in something that already exists now, and like componentize it and squeeze it in, and, you know, maybe like eventually take over and like get rid of that grid framework, because you may not need it anymore. You probably won't need it anymore. Okay.
And then, so sort of like frameworks, like kind of my thoughts also like to like Bootstrap. You know, do you feel like the need to use a Bootstrap with grid anymore, or is it like
I'm like one of those like I hate Bootstrap people, but it's only because it's not a tool that I need, because I'm a CSS girl. Like CSS is my strength. I don't need I don't want to fight with something. I feel like I've always had to fight with Bootstrap whenever I've used it. So it's been years. I've like never reached for it. I'm also fortunate to like be able to own my own code base, usually like make the CSS architecture decisions. So I never reached for Bootstrap, but Natalia Shelburne has given at the last CSS Layout Club, she gave a really great talk that is about how she used CSS grid at the New York Times, where she works, and has Bootstrap as a fallback. So like everything's already in Bootstrap. Like that's the app that she works on, relies on Bootstrap, but she's able to, and it's like 12 lines of Sass. It's really not very much. That just cancels out all the Bootstrap. So then she can like style it with grid instead. And she has an article that goes about it. So that's like super powerful, right? So like that's 12 lines, and then you can like progressively enhance your website and use this new technology. And then one day you probably won't need that Bootstrap anymore because you're on like pure CSS. I'm a purist. I'd rather use what the browser gives me if it's great than rely on a framework. Although I think frameworks push us forward. Like if frameworks solve the in-between problems, and then somehow the browsers are like, oh, I guess that's a problem because that framework's popular. This is how I think it goes in my mind. I don't know how it actually goes. Maybe we'll try and solve for that, and then they solve for it, and then the framework like slowly dies. I think that's the life cycle of a framework, right?
I wish that was how it worked. Yeah, because like we had like so many frameworks. I guess I hope that's how it happened, but I feel like we had like so many. We still out there like old frameworks, CSS frameworks, and doing that. But it reminds me of a story where like, you know, when Netscape 4 was still an issue with CSS support, and Zellman would give a talk where like, you know, he has he runs or publishes a list apart, right? So he's like, oh, we have this like fancy new layout for list apart. And so, but we didn't want to like go back and spend all this time and energy that we didn't have to spend and to make it backwards compatible. So we just give it like just default ugly styling, like not ugly, but like browser styling. And it turns out that his readership in SK4 actually took off. and then also Andy Clark, he was very into, he was very anti-IE, like anti-7 or 6, whatever. So I loved his approach was that if you're an old version of IE, you would just get like kind of a print style sheet of it. And so that's my mentality. Like if I don't work for an agency like that making websites, but because I don't have to make that sacrifice. I don't have to like make sure fall back to Bootstrap. But I feel like, hey, if I build a website now, I'm going to do like feature support, query, and then also just like that. We talked about with Rachel Andrew about feature supports. So I just feel like I'll just give you my nice looking print style sheet.
Yeah.
And it's like, minus all the like breakpoints and everything, page breaks.
But
and all
probably like if you're writing your DOM correctly, that should be fine, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that should be totally usable and legible. Like, I'm all for like with grid, like this comes up like all the time. Like I got into an argument in a like front end development Slack channel about this, and I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, this is why I don't tweet that much. But like about like, well, why now you're, because the way to write grid now is that you write a fallback style as your default, and then you wrap your grid styles in a feature query for display grid. So then that means that old browsers that don't understand feature queries or grid will get the fallback styles of whatever you want, floats or flexbox or tables or whoever you want. And then the browsers that are like new and understand grid will read the grid code and do that, right? So a lot, like what people have asked me a lot is, well, isn't that a waste? Like you're writing, like why would I just write two ways to solve one problem? Like that's a waste of time.
Right.
Like I'll just wait until grids everywhere. But I mean, I don't know. Like, I guess, I mean, that's your decision and that's your, your project and your code base. But like, I mean, what is grid? Grid's like, it's like 75% globally. Like I'd rather give people most people a better experience and like less people a still good experience. But I mean, I think grid actually like readable, usable experience. Like as long as something doesn't look broken to me, that means my fallback's okay. Like that's my like the way I weigh it. And I'm learning how to use a new technology that soon is going to be the norm.
Right.
And it's fun. And actually, like most of the time when I'm writing grid, it's like usually I'm just making columns and then letting everything like flow.
Right.
And it's like 3 lines of CSS and it solves all my problems. And then my fallback is like 20 lines of CSS, so my grid is taking me like 5 minutes to write. And then my fallback is taking me, like the old days.
Yeah. I feel like someone, I forgot it was Dave or it was someone else, Dave Rupert, like he, I'm calling out Dave, but it probably wasn't Dave, but he was, he recreated Bootstrap with like 12 lines of CSS grid code. And I was like, oh, that is so amazing. So I was like, so I think just for sanity, learning grid is worth it. Right. So like, yeah, I just feel like, hey, that's, and people just pull complex layouts out without having to spend all day troubleshooting Bootstrap and trying to pull it out. So like, I feel like also like, sorry, what were you saying?
I was just going to say, like, we have to remember that Bootstrap is a hack. And the reason why these frameworks existed was because we didn't have anything to do this before, and hacks were taking us a lot of time. So these grid frameworks came up to save us all of that time. So hacks are buggy. They're not meant to do these things. We're like trying to make something do something it's not supposed to do. So this is meant to do this, and it's just really a pleasant experience. Maybe everybody will love CSS again. Maybe that's what Grid's going to do.
You're telling me people don't love CSS? I don't understand.
I've heard.
I don't understand. Who are these
few
people?
People complain every once in a while that they don't like CSS.
Oh, but yeah. But I just like one of the things I love about CSS grids going forward is like I feel bad, but like I don't have time to do a lot of design work that I want to do because I'm managing a whole bunch of. At least I used to manage a whole lot of other projects, so I would actually look for WordPress themes and find the one that would suit me the best. And I get them, and they haven't been updated in a while, or they've been updated. Their approach to web design is, I'm not going to say it's worse than mine, but it's not as, how I would say, forward thinking about the web or maintainable. So one of the things I'm looking forward to is, not only how like Matt Mullenweg wants everyone to learn JavaScript who works on WordPress, but also the fact that like themes are going to be so much easier to maintain going forward and not like just this cluster mess of CSS rules that WordPress themes have to deal with. And so that's not going to say people are actually going to get better at writing code, for example, but think there's like, if you have less lines of code to write a grid, that you maybe won't have to write like 100 to 200 lines of really bad CSS for a whole bunch of permutations for layout that they can just do quickly. So
yeah, I mean, why do people hate CSS? Because it's not intuitive, right? Like because we've all had to like learn the hacks, and it's something that you have to learn, you have to fail at, and like a lot, you have to learn the hard way, I think, with it, and like and it can get frustrating really fast. I mean, I guess every language kind of does that, but it just seems so easy. Like color red, like it just seems so easy, like, oh, I'm going to turn something red, but like anybody can like draw, a red bunny, but like to draw like a red bunny that's really nice looking, like it's to really be an illustration, and like the hairs, and like it's so deceivingly simple. But now that I've said it, I'm like, yeah, maybe this is it. Like maybe Grid is going to be like the gateway to get people back excited about CSS, because I think that's maybe why CSS has a bad rap and nobody wants to learn it, and people are figuring out ways to avoid writing it or dealing with the cascade, is just because it hasn't been enjoyable. Right. It's been more frustrating.
Well, my favorite thing is the JavaScript developers who think CSS is too easy and then can't troubleshoot simple CSS problems and then say it's too hard.
Yeah.
It's just like I was in a workshop once, and this JavaScript, it was about JavaScript, and so he was actually trying to troubleshoot this demo application that he built and everything like that, and it was kind of like this gallery display, if you will, thumbnails, and he couldn't get things to line up, which is like Flexbox solution, right? So which is what we do now, but he didn't know Flexbox, and it wasn't really well supported back then, so it was like kind of old school hack to do it, and he couldn't solve the CSS problem, and which is like kind of relatively simple if you're just do like inline block and whatever. But and I was just like, but here's this JavaScript wizard, like he knows his stuff about JavaScript, and he's like throwing CSS underneath the bus because he doesn't understand the code, right? So, but I wouldn't. And
then probably writing like a bunch of JavaScript to do something that CSS can do in 3 lines, right, which is actually a detriment to your project, right? Mm-hmm. Like you really need to know what tool to pull out of the toolbox to solve the problems. I mean, I think we've all seen those code bases that are like, well, this is a JavaScript developer, and it's like 20,000 lines of JavaScript that are like doing styles. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't throw JavaScript underneath the bus because I'm not a wizard at it, but whatever. But apparently it's okay to throw CSS underneath the bus. These are just issues I have to deal with, Brenda. I don't worry about me.
Well, there's plenty of people who will throw JavaScript under the bus too. I mean, I like JavaScript. I'm trying to like learn more JavaScript. Yeah. But maybe I just like the difficult children. Mm. Maybe that's my lot in life.
Difficult children. Yeah, I think. But I saw a workshop by Will Sutton. He's a British fellow, and he does this great workshop where he just breaks down JavaScript and it tells you like why things are happening and why things are. And like, it's all basic stuff that you already know, even if you just have been around JavaScript for a while, but he actually explains it. And like, my mind was like opened up, like, oh, that's why things happen the way they do. And and I was just like, oh.
Will you share that with me, or
share
that person with me? Like, because that's right now I'm trying, like in my current role, I'm not necessarily like having to write a lot of JavaScript. So I've been studying myself to try and like learn more. And I purposefully have started like vanilla. Because I want to like going that route of like, I want to understand the language, and then I know then I can understand React and Angular and the next thing, you know?
Yeah. So I work with,
that's really interesting.
Well, I work with front-end masters right now. So actually, like, I've been working with them since April, and I love working there. And so what we do is right now do a lot of auditing of workshops right now. So Will Sutton's actually has a workshop, and it's coming out either this coming week or next week after. So probably like in a week around when this podcast comes out. So it's coming out, and so let's go on there. And then also to understand frameworks, I felt like Sarah Drasner's introduction to Vue.js was really good as well.
She's really good at explaining things.
Yeah, and she also won Best of CSS DevConf, the Queen Mary edition.
Yeah,
which was really great. And so her style of teaching is just like, I've made 100 demos, and I've ordered them in order of okay to hotness. And so we're going to go through all of them, and your mind's going to be blown halfway through.
That's a really good description.
It's definitely. But so her workshop is really great. So in terms of like understanding like, oh, frameworks, and then you can apply that like, oh, so that's how things are working. But also Vue is conceptually different in terms of how React is built and stuff like that too. So, but I felt like it gave me like, oh, okay, this is great. But I felt like Will Sutton's workshop allowed me to open up. It's like, oh, this is what everyone's been trying to teach me about JavaScript, about this. Okay, now I understand. So it's really more a gateway. So
sometimes you have to hear like something explained like 20 times by 20 different people to get it to click. I'm totally in that moment right now where I'm not sure what.
Right.
I'm seeking out new ways to tell me the same thing so it can really like sink in.
Right. So aside from meetups in New York, how are they? What resources did you learn to help you learn CSS Grid?
Really mostly the meetup, and then just trial and error, and everything by Rachel Andrew.
Okay.
I mean, she's got like the Bible for CSS Grid basically on her website. Yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, cool. And then also there's 1,000-page book probably too.
That's probably helpful. But I think also like solving real problems, like just always keeping it in the back of my mind, like when I'm going to solve a layout problem and I think, oh, could Grid do this? Yeah. Let me try it. And not being afraid. Like another good thing about my job is that we have like Fridays are usually like investment days where we can do our own thing and learn things. So I'll often use that time to do a little more exploration on a technology that I want to use on a client project that I might not feel comfortable billing for. Okay. To see if it's viable. So that's also when I did a lot of Grid stuff because I didn't want to bill for like too much exploration if it was something that like when it was new.
Right.
In those moments.
Okay. How funky have you been working with CSS Grids? If I may be so bold and ask, like, have you like pushed the boundaries a lot in terms of like animating them or overlapping them or doing some weird things? If I remember correctly in your presentation, you said like, oh, I think I coded this right, and then I checked it later, and actually I didn't, and it was like really forgiving.
Yeah.
If I remember, so I remember that point. I was like, I think everyone was like, "Oh, thank goodness!" Like, I was like,
That's
"Oh."
one of those things that you're like, this is exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Is right before I gave my talk, I was like, because I had been traveling for 2 weeks before I went to CSS DevConf and like was staying with my mom, so I didn't really have time to like do a full rehearsal for myself. Like I was never alone, so I took the morning before my talk on Monday to kind of run through it in my hotel. And I went back and was looking, I was like at the examples I was going to use and noted, like, it was really like an hour before I gave the talk that I noticed a lot of these errors. And I was like, oh crap. And I was like, how am I going to present this? But like, I really appreciate when people, I mean, because we all do that. Like we all like learn from from the past. Like I think that's when I inserted a slide in my talk that was like, I want to be able to look back at code I've written in the past and think, what was I thinking? Because that means that I'm still growing and learning.
Right.
That's my disclaimer. But yeah, that was it. Like that was the first time I used Grid in a client project. And and at first when I looked at it, I couldn't figure out why it was still working. And then I figured it out, I think like in the talk, why it was still working. But it's very forgiving. I mean, there's like a mysterious, I think it's still mysterious to everybody in a way, like algorithm for Grid. Like you can tell it exactly where to put things, but it will also, if you don't tell it, do its best to figure it out for you. And like that's what happened in this case. Was like basically all I had was display grid, and then I had one cell that I purposely placed on like a third column, second row line. And just because I had taken this one cell and placed it in a cell area, the grid algorithm was like, oh, so I guess you want 3 columns and at least 2 rows. So then I'll do that and figure everything else out. Like the mistake I had was that the grid template columns property was the value was like a mess and it didn't make any sense, but it was enough that I told one element where to be, that it was like, oh, okay, I'll just create everything else around it, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's nice when that's one of the things I liked about designing for the web. Because I went through my program I was going through was the print based, and I just liked it how like forgiving the browser was in terms of laying out things. So it was nice. But I think you could hear a collective like, like through the audience. It was like people were like, oh, okay, so it won't like blow up my face. Okay, great.
Yeah, and I think I also like noticed too right before I gave the talk that one client I worked on, they like one of the things to be aware of using Grid right now is that old versions of Auto Prefixer will automatically add the MS vendor prefix to Grid, which you may or may not want. That could kind of mess up your fallback because the new Grid that's not behind the vendor prefix is more robust than that like 5+ year old version from. So usually I just don't want to deal with it. I just want like Internet Explorer to use my fallback so I don't have to worry about what this in-between spec is like.
Right.
And so you can set auto prefixer old versions to disable Grid. The new version of auto prefixer has it disabled by default, so that's great. Auto prefixer 7 and up. But I guess that I didn't learn that until after I'd left the client project that I like wasn't on anymore. And I had built this, but it hadn't shipped yet. So bad me. I did not check this. And before the conference, before I went on stage, I was like, oh, I'll show this in Browser Stack, on Internet Explorer that my fallback works. And it was totally broken. I was like, oh my God. and so I emailed the client afterwards. I was like, hey, you need to do this. Yeah. They fixed it. So now it works. But that was live for like a couple months.
Wow.
Nobody died. Nobody I think too, it's important, I am proud of my work and I want to do good work and I don't want to mess things up, but like nobody noticed. And this was like a pretty big, like popular website. Like, I don't know. Maybe I don't know. I mean, I think we're not like saving lives for the most part, like it's not life or death, a lot of our work. So
I like to think I'm curing cancer, Brenda. Am I not curing cancer?
There's probably apps that like are helping to cure cancer, but this app was not doing that.
Okay. All right. Oh, well, I'm going to lie to my mom now. That's okay. So now, what was it just trial and error? Like what tools did you use to help construct grids, or like what's out there that?
Oh gosh, the Firefox dev tool for grid is dope.
Okay.
They have a website that kind of like shows you about it, and like Jen Simmons has like been showing like, and she'll come to the meetup and be like, so should we show the numbers like this, or like what works better? And so that's been awesome too, to kind of like get to be a part of that. Oh, no. Like the development of that, like as I've been playing with the spec. I usually am in Chrome, and it's gotten me back into Firefox more because you can like show the lines of the grid and the gaps between the grid, and you can change the color so that it shows against the background, and it shows the numbers, and it even shows the names if you had grid template areas. It's just a really robust tool that also can catch like a bunch of errors to visualize everything.
Okay, cool. Definitely check that out. So with working with CSS Grid so far, is there anything that you wish it did do that it hasn't done yet, or your wish, or things that, any complaints, I guess?
I think like the big layout thing that we still don't have, that CSS can't do, that JavaScript does, is a masonry type layout.
Oh, really? Okay.
Like a grid wants everything in nice squares. I think, Rachel Andrew was talking about this, like you can't Tetris in grid pieces. So like the way I mentally think about a masonry type layout is that you, instead of it's like top to bottom, but you have like your top DOM content on top and then older below, but things just kind of fit in no matter what their height is, like in columns. So we can like do that layout in columns, but we can't do it in the order we want to do it, So I don't know if that's something that grid should do, but like I would love for something that would allow us to do that layout in CSS. And then the other big thing that I've heard is coming with grid is to have a subgrid, which is like right now, if you display grid, it only affects the direct children of that element. So, but what if you want to line up something inside one of those child elements, like a grandchild, you want it to line up, along the grid. You kind of have to like create a new grid with like the same, parameters or something. Like it can't go up the chain to understand where to go based on that. So I hear that's something that the browsers are working on for like, grid 2.0 to add on to what already exists. That would be useful. I
think it's just HTML table layouts all the way down, Brenda. just all the way. We just bring out the HTML table layouts to save the day. But yeah, so it's you just do like kind of nested tables is kind of what I was thinking about, but nested grids sort of, which no one wants to do. We've learned that from it. We've learned from our mistakes, I hope.
Somebody actually like in the office just asked, like, hey, and I hadn't even thought about this either, was like, so I'm trying to do what a table does, but not use a table, which I want like just a border around everything to be just 1 pixel.
Yeah.
But do I have to do like border right, but then not the last one? Like I'm still stuck in this world. Like can grid do something like that? And I was thinking about it, I'm like, can grid do something like that? And then somebody else said, oh, just put a background color on your grid parent and give a grid gap of 1 pixel. And then you have like, I was like, oh my gosh, yes. That was almost too easy. I couldn't come up with it right away, but
that's awesome. Yeah. Couldn't you just put a 1 pixel border on the parent?
But yeah, like that's what I do a lot with grid is like, because I think that's also like one of the coolest things about grid is that it only, like when you specify the grid gap, which is like the gutter in between elements, it doesn't apply that to the outside. So you can have things that are 100% width, but then still have an even spacing inside without having to like manage children and like nth childs and things like that. So usually, but if I want that border or want that space to be even as the grid gap, I'll just like on my parent will be like display grid gap 1 rem, padding 1 rem. And then everything is, kind of spaced nice and evenly.
Okay. Yeah, I think Wes Boss was trying to make a masonry layout with CSS grids, or I think also someone else was too, but they looked at making it the dense kind of version.
Yeah.
And so he was trying to like force it to do that. And I'm not a big fan of masonry layouts because I feel like it's information overload in terms of that, but I guess people like them. But yeah, so that's kind of like one approach. I don't know off the top of my head if that's a good way of doing it.
Yeah, I guess you could do that, but it would probably also, you still can't really control your DOM order that way, right? Because it's going to like put in, when you do the dents, it like puts the pieces in wherever they fit.
Right. Probably, yeah. So even if you come up with like new content, you don't know like where it's going to fall. Yeah. So.
But that's cool.
Yeah.
Like I'm really excited to see things like you asked earlier about animations, and I haven't done a whole lot with that. Like I do know you can't animate something from one cell to another. Yeah. Like you can't really animate grid properties because that's just like too much for the browser to understand and manage, but there's a cool, I had this in my slides, a cool code drops example of like just a grid layout that has like a transition in and out of like background colors on the grid. That's really powerful. So, there's always a way to get something visually interesting moving.
Cool. Awesome. So, is there anything, I think it's a good point to wrap things up, but is there anything about CSS grids, like any like final point that we probably didn't mention or could talk about?
Just use it, like try it and use it. I mean, it's, I think the last thing, and this was the thing that I wanted my talk, my goal of my talk was that people were going to leave and be like, I can use this right now. And I didn't think I could. And so I think that's the thing. You can use this right now. CSS isn't, we don't have to wait. Like you hear about something and you think, oh, great, in 5 years, I'll be able to use that. Like, no, like things are getting better now. And CSS Grid is an example of that. Like look into it because you can use it right now and make CSS fun again. And it's really powerful. And I think like, I'm really excited to see when we get, like I have one little example that I have on a code pen of a layout for like an article that I really think is cool. And I want to insert it somewhere so badly. I just don't have like the project that's the right like I want to build a personal blog just to use this layout because I don't know how to do this layout without grid. And so I'm looking forward to more of that, of breaking out of our norms and like being inspired by what other people do.
Oh, nice. Okay. Is there anything that you're really passionate about or interested in right now besides grid?
No, it's just grid.
Okay.
And like I said, like personally, I'm learning, I'm really trying to learn JavaScript, which is, man, it's a beast.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I feel, I love my job. So it's allowed me to explore JavaScript a lot more. And so I'm really just amazed at how, like, because I had my head down running events for so long. And so it's just so amazing to see how JavaScript, when I last looked at it into where it is now and see how far it's gone and where it's going and what it's doing, just blows my mind about and how it constantly is changing is amazing. So I
try not to, I don't think about it as scary so much anymore. I think about that like as I mean, everything, like, I try not to put that, I think I'm good about not putting that pressure on myself that I need to know everything, but I think it's fun, and I feel like I just kept hitting a wall of then now I can't accomplish what I want to accomplish because I don't know JavaScript. So it's been fun to break those barriers down.
Yeah, my biggest hurdle, just because you asked, is that with JavaScript, is that the naming things in JavaScript gets me so frustrated because they name things and it's like, well, that's not what I would think of for that name. And so that just really burns me.
Ooh.
Yeah, because one thing is like proto and prototype are two different things, but they have proto in their name. So like, just like that's one minor thing. So, but it really kind of. So I have to unlearn all my biases about naming things. Like, okay, because one of the things, like when you learn a new language, it doesn't have to be code or anything, but like just learning the definitions of words gets you so far further than just when you're trying to learn a new language. So learning the vocabulary is very important, and I think that's what CSS, when I started learning, was like, you want to learn the spec, you want to like try to learn what things do, what they're supposed to do, so like you actually know what things are, and that's like the hardest part right now is trying to keep track of everything, and so and that's why like having a great IDE or code editor like I think Visual Source Code right now is like really awesome for
cool.
that. So yeah, I'm not sure what you use.
I'm still in Sublime land.
Oh.
I haven't felt moved to change.
Oh man. But so I moved off of, I don't know what that was using before, but like, so I would try to use Sublime and I felt like I was just like, no offense to Sublime users, or I've used Sublime still sometimes, but like I just feel like I was constantly just beating my head against the wall trying to get Sublime to like be my editor and not like be its own thing. And then so we just so I just cranked up Visual Code Editor, Visual Source Studio Code, and it's amazing. Like I just feel like, I'm just up and running. It's not fighting me. I can just go in there, and then I can still like tweak it and do things, and it's pretty awesome. So I feel like I
might check that. I'm feeling close. Like I switched to Vim for a little bit, and there were a lot of things I really liked about Vim. But I'm such a I'll name something and then I'll name a class and then I'll hate the name and then I'll want to change it everywhere. And like, I just couldn't find and replace in like it was just too hard. Yeah. And I had people show me like multiple times and I had a cheat sheet, but I found every time I needed to do that, I just opened Sublime Text and do it there. And then eventually I was like back in Sublime Text. But like your point, I think like is really about vocabulary, because I think if you know vocabulary, then you know what to Google to find an answer to something when you don't know what to do. Yeah. So, and that's something that I think is a weakness for me is learning the vocabulary of what things are. Like I see patterns and I'm like, okay, that thing goes in parentheses, so I know what that is and I know what to put there. But then it's an argument. Okay, now I know what to Google to like figure out how to fix it and stuff.
Right. Yeah. And it's really important. Yeah. So it's very important to Google. I can't stress that enough. Yeah, because I remember like Chris Coyer, like when he like several years ago, he did a presentation. It's like, okay, everyone knows how to be a web developer, right? And there was something like, how do we learn to be a web developer? And they like had like one slide with 5 words, and they were all Google. It's all like, that's awesome. Yeah. So how can people find you on the internet?
I am Brenda Marie NYC on Twitter, and I'm Brenda Storer, brendastore.com. I also guest host a podcast from time to time called Tentative that's about design and front end. That's through Thoughtbot. And we actually have an episode coming out talking about CSS Dev Comp.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Nice. I will be sure to listen. Check it out. Cool. And I am on Twitter. I'm Teleject, TELEJECT, and you're listening to the Non-Breaking Space Show. So be sure to subscribe at nonbreakingspace.tv. Okay, thank you so much, Brenda.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure just to sit and chat with you, actually.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk with me today. It was awesome.